Valve's actions are usually surrounded in mystery, and their silence leaves us to fruitlessly speculate about why they have or haven't done what we thought they would, or should. In this presentation from 2014, Robin Walker revealed that Valve likes to be a fly on the wall, listening to what people have to say when they don't think that Valve is listening. And he says that bad communication is worse than none at all. Valve is a company that communicates in actions rather than words. If there is a bug in a game, the value is in fixing that bug, not in announcing that they'll fix that bug. Talking about it only ups the risk, should they then not fix it for one reason or another. Maybe fixing it sacrifices something too important. Maybe it was never a bug in the first place. But by commenting on it, Valve has committed themselves and has tainted future community conversation around that topic, since Valve has now publicly chosen a side in the debate. So you can imagine everyone's surprise when Valve recently did an interview with PC Gamer, where they answered a bunch of questions that, until now, we have only been able to speculate about. For most companies, this isn't such a big deal, but this is Valve we're talking about here. This will be an article that will be referred back to for years to come, and used to win many forum discussions and debates as CS2 evolves. Check it out using the link in this video's description. They spill the beans on the successes and mistakes that they made during CSGO's lifetime. They consider their first experiment with the game, being the addition of a matchmaking system, to be their most successful, as it instantly became the most popular game mode and drove CSGO's player base and player retention to new highs. So there you go. I suppose the addition of digital weapon skins was only the second most successful thing they did. As for the missteps, they said they did many, but mentioned the addition of the R8 revolver in particular, which when it was first released was a highly accurate, very affordable, one-hit killing machine. The mistake was namely in the way that it was rolled out to everybody, and how it was so highly disruptive to the game, even though it was fixed the very next day. They say this incident changed the way they shipped future changes to weapons, being careful to roll out major changes to weapons in a more incremental way, I suppose. They say that most of the mistakes they made came from when Valve didn't follow their own way of listening and responding to community feedback, but also admit that some processes they had were simply bad. As for why CS2 was needed, they confirm what we all knew already, that CSGO was being limited by aging technology, and so moving CS2 to the new Source 2 engine was the best way to continue supporting the series, especially since the rest of Valve was also transitioning over to this new engine, and away from the Source 1 engine that CSGO was being powered by. They also admit they had no idea how successful CSGO would be, nor how long the game would last for, so it feels like they played most of CSGO's development by ear, which again isn't too much of a surprise, and is probably what they'll do with CS2 as well. Valve states that CS2 is the largest technical leap in the history of Counter-Strike, which is fair enough. It's been 18 years since the last time the series got a new engine, and a lot has changed in that time, and Source 2 finally brings the game up to almost present-day standards. But I suppose 18 years ago, when the game leapt from Gold Source to Source 1, felt like a bigger jump for me, because every part of the game radically changed, and some of the maps we got for it back then have remained virtually unchanged ever since, with many original assets even surviving the jump over to Source 2. So Counter-Strike 2 may be the biggest leap technically, but this has been masked by Valve doing everything they can to keep most of it feeling the same. I'm going to bunch the two hitreg answers we got together here. As a reminder for future viewers, CSGO had Valve-hosted 64-tick servers and third-party ones which were mostly 128-tick, and there were endless forum discussions arguing that Valve should also upgrade their own servers to 128-tick. Now CS2 has just one type of server, which uses a new Subtick system which borrows aspects from 64-tick, gameplay components similar to pre-existing 128-tick, and other bits which are theoretically now infinite-tick. It's pretty clear why this is better, but it's nice to hear it from Valve themselves. They said that CSGO's player base was split, and that different tick rates affected things like how grenades bounced and how spray patterns worked, and the issue was that players had difficulty switching between the two. So Subtick is here to unify the player base. They've tried to match 128-tick behaviour wherever possible, which I presume is because that's the standard that pro players have practiced on the most, so keeping this similar makes the move to the new game easier on them. Subtick has drawn a lot of criticism for pretty much every missed shot every player has experienced since CS2 rolled out. But here, Valve are saying that, at least with the examples that PC Gamer provided, they're not an issue with Subtick, but are instead things like animation mismatches. But stated that the important thing is that, thanks to the community posting issues such as these to places like Reddit, it helps Valve to isolate and to quickly fix these problems. So there you go. If you see something strange with CS2, post it online and it helps Valve to fix it. There was a bit of a strange question about NFTs. The idea of non-fungible tokens is that because they're based in blockchain, they can represent digital items in a way where each is provably unique, finite in quantity, and thus can have digital value. But Valve isn't using this. Firstly, because skins in CSGO have been around for longer than NFTs have, and secondly, because in this interview, Valve says they don't know enough about NFTs to weigh in on the conversation. So I guess that Valve just uses their servers to do what NFTs do, but without the need for NFTs. But this does mean that we need to have faith in Valve's servers to keep our digital items artificially rare and secure, and existing. I suppose this raises an interesting point though. If Valve ever failed, then these digital items in their current state would cease to exist. Whereas if they were stored in blockchain, then you'd technically still have them. Though who knows how much value they'd retain once the game therefore goes down. But all this talk involves Valve no longer existing, so it's no surprise that Valve isn't too interested in thinking about this. Valve just says that they knew that CS2 would replace CSGO, so from an early stage they worked to get all the digital items ported over, which they said sometimes wasn't easy to get some items fitting the look and feel of the new game, presumably from the new lighting and shaders of Source 2. They also say they didn't pay much attention to the community market or the price of items in the lead up to Counter-Strike 2. They say player interest in content fluctuates over time for all number of reasons, so the price of items wasn't a priority for Valve when making this new game, and that they only look to market prices when they're trying to figure out what new content players might want. Does Valve think that Counter-Strike 2's release was a success? Yes. They state player numbers as a sign of how successful it's been. And they think one of the best bits about it was the limited test, which enabled them to get it playtested early, and it helped drive many of the decisions they made leading up to its release. I've personally been wondering if they regretted saying, in the first trailer for the game, that the game would be coming summer 2023, especially when it eventually released in what was more like autumn, and with many of its more casual game modes still missing. But Valve thinks it released at the right time, acknowledging that it would have been nice to have more features added during a longer beta period, but then they listed a long bunch of reasons for why doing that wouldn't have been simple. It sounds like betas get immediate attention, but then a lot of players gradually trickle back to what they know already, leaving just the yes men who maybe don't represent how the player base as a whole may feel about this new game. So for Valve to get the playtesting and feedback required, an abrupt and forced transition over to CS2 was kind of needed, even if it is, and still is, bumpy and feature incomplete. Because it complicates things for everyone to maintain two games and two different player bases at the same time. By forcing everybody over to the new game, Valve's efforts can then be focused on bug fixing, improving, and adding to this new game. I think Valve knew that the leap to a new game engine was never going to be an elegant transition, and instead of minimizing disruption, they instead chose to minimize the duration of that disruption. Their main regret was actually the system requirements for CS2. Compared with 11-year-old CSGO, CS2 is a lot more demanding on PCs, and although any half-decent, relatively modern PC should still be able to run it, there are players on older devices who are now left unable to play Counter-Strike acceptably or even at all anymore. Valve regrets not informing those people earlier. Valve surprised me by being surprised that Premier has become the most successful game mode in CS2. The game mode existed in CSGO, but there it was just like competitive mode, only you had less choice over which map you played. However, this time around, it's separate from competitive mode, complete with its own leaderboard for you to climb, and it won't affect your ranks elsewhere. And I also think it's got popular because gaining competitive ranks has been made more difficult now they're on a per map basis. So those could all be reasons for Premier's unexpected success. And also because the game currently lacks many of the other game modes that CSGO used to have. I didn't expect PC Gamer to ask Valve if they were going to introduce new weapons to CS2, and I certainly didn't expect Valve to respond with absolutely. It seems like new weapons are something that Valve has given a lot of thought to, perhaps being the reason for CS2's new customizable loadout system. Valve is looking to new weapons to help keep gameplay interesting, to shape up previously stale metas, and to give players the right tools where previously there may have been none, or where there were just a very limited number of existing weapons they could have used. What's really interesting about this is that for the longest time, Counter-Strike clearly had too many weapons, and most of them went largely unused. And it felt like it was something that was addressed over CSGO's lifespan, as Valve tried to give each weapon category a more defined and balanced purpose for existing. And the way they've now split them into limited categories really intrigues me. Right now it's rather generous, but if they begin shrinking the size of these categories down, then it will give players, and teams, some really difficult choices to make when it comes to deciding which tools to keep and which weapons to sacrifice for their next match. There's a whole video's worth of speculation here, which I won't go into right now. And then PC Gamer asks about aiming down sights, which Valve shuts down by saying, if anything, they want to move in the opposite direction, saying that aiming down weapon sights is a solution to problems typically seen with controllers, but that it isn't so essential for PC users, and that Counter-Strike's player base hasn't expressed concern about this feature. Look at this! Valve is saying they have no plans to change the basics in Counter-Strike 2, which means that in just a few months' time, they're going to have this incredible idea for a new weapon that involves aiming down sights to obstruct your vision in some way, and they're going to have to backtrack on this. Valve acknowledges Dust 2's awesomeness, its layout, its timings, and its simplicity. saying that maps before it didn't quite work competitively and that everything since has been influenced by it. And I agree with this entirely. For the longest time I did feel like Dust 2 stood out above the rest. And I still love the map. There were whole sections of other maps that I disliked, for reasons I couldn't quite put my finger on. Yet I've always enjoyed every section of Dust 2, playing as both teams. However, just like with the weapons, CSGO has gone a long way towards bringing the other maps up to, and in some ways surpassing, Dust 2's winning formula, and I no longer get that horrible dread when something other than Dust 2 is selected. Well, apart from Mirage, which is still awful. PC Gamer pointed out that CS2 has focused on the competitive side and has neglected casual modes and the weirder ones like surfing, which Valve promises haven't been forgotten. I don't like to rely on leaked screenshots and trailer footage because I know that Valve's plans tend to change. But Valve promises that when it comes to adding more game modes, the popular ones will be reintroduced and other ones will be explored. Exciting. But they say that all these game modes require solid core gameplay, so that's why they've prioritized competitive mode to ensure that it all works as intended. They understand how frustrating it is for players who can't currently access their favourite game modes, but believe this slow rollout is the best approach for CS2's long-term success. This one was interesting. When asked about the 3 most important things every Counter-Strike map should have, Valve just responds with players. I see this as Valve accepting that mappers have a real challenge in getting people to give new maps a chance, and that there's no better way to get a great map than to subject a not great map to the game's immense player base, and that the most successful mappers are the ones who get their maps into players' hands early and who iterate on it often in response to feedback. In another response, Valve says that the most important thing for the long-term health of the game is the improved tools for artists, and that this was the foundation of Source 2. I came to Counter-Strike for its mapping, so this means a lot to me to hear that Valve probably are coming up with some clever ways of encouraging players to playtest new and community-made maps. Because a huge amount of work goes into making a map, yet the biggest challenge is always in trying to get it played. So there you go. These new improved Source 2 tools are key to all community content that will shape CS2 in the years to come. So don't give up hope, artists and mappers. Your efforts may be rewarded. Valve's plans for CS2 in the immediate future are just to remain flexible, to observe the game's player base and to balance boring but essential bug fixing with the more fun task of rolling out the long list of pre-existing and new features currently missing from this edition of Counter-Strike. As for how they think CS2 will look in 10 years' time, Valve doesn't have a clue. I suppose as I've followed this game and Valve for so long and have had so long to think about all this stuff, none of what was said in this interview is too surprising, other than that this interview actually exists. But like I said at the beginning, it's great to finally get Valve's word on these things directly, especially when it comes to community-driven content like maps and game modes. I've been looking through Reddit at your reactions to this interview, and you seem mostly surprised that Valve was surprised about Premier's success, but also that anti-cheat wasn't mentioned. This is something where specifics are best shrouded in secrecy, but I would be very surprised if they hadn't done anything on this for a new game on a new engine. I definitely feel like anti-cheat and the Overwatch system took a bit of a back seat towards the end of CSGO's life. And looking back, it's probably because the developers were moving over to developing Counter-Strike for Source 2. But I imagine big new anti-cheat measures will be something that Valve announces after the fact, rather than before. Just for the simple reason that it's easier to catch a cheater if you do it before telling them how you're going to catch them. But yeah, all very exciting stuff. I wonder how many years it will be before Valve does an interview again.